The Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador demands Guillermo Lazo's government to stop repression and lift the state of emergency on the 10th day of protest. Malawi's President Lazarus Chakwera relieved his Vice President Saulos Chilima of all delegated powers after Chilima was named in a massive corruption scandal in government contracts already implicating several senior officials. Afghanistan's government has appealed for more international aid as the country reels from a devastating 6.1 magnitude earthquake which killed at least 1,000 people and left international organizations scrambling to provide emergency shelter and food to promote the regions. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. In Ecuador, social, indigenous, former, and Afro movements reiterated their willingness to dialogue unconditionally with Guillermo Lazo's government, including a halt to repressive actions and the derogation of the state of exception. Through a joint statement, the organizations reaffirmed the citizens' demand of the 10 points presented by the CONAIE through the permanent dialogue table, which structurally and effectively addresses the reality of the country, provided that the conditions and guarantees exist for its realization. In this sense, they emphasized that the dialogue between the organizations and the state should be frontal, without the intervention of mediators, but with human rights organizations as warrantors of the process. The president of CONAIE, Leonidas Issa, called on the international community to observe the government of Guillermo Lazo has not given answers to his demands.
If we are here, it is because we are firm and consistent. On November the 10th, the president said that in 15 days he would solve the fuel problem. More than 7 months have already passed. He has completed 1 year of administration. Have we any answers, comrades? None. Then I ask and I raise this to the international level, to the international community, to the human rights institutions, this indigenous movement, the popular sector, workers, unions, everyone, Afros, indigenous people, those living in the mountains. We have Quito, you hear well, the city of Quito, those who are here. It is not that we have come from the provinces, it is Quito here ready to fight.
In Chile, workers of the state-owned company Codelco, the world's largest copper producer, began a national strike on Wednesday to protest against the closure of a melting plant. The Chilean Copper Workers Federation announced in a public statement that all Codelco operations were paralyzed, following the government's announcement to close the Ventana melting plant located in the Valparaíso region. The government's decision was taken after multiple and frequent episodes of contamination in the area. According to BioBio Chile, 26 unions comprising approximately 40,000 workers are participating in the strike. Unions have described the closure as arbitrary and demand that the government invest $54 million to bring the plant up to the highest environmental standards. In Colombia, hearing continues for kidnappings perpetrated by the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, during the armed conflict. During the hearings before the victims and magistrates of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the last commander of the disappeared FARC-EP admitted such acts at the time. The former guerrilla leaders Pablo Catatumbo, Julián Gallo, Pastor Alape, Milton Toncel, Rodrigo Granda, and Jaime Alberto Parra also recognized their responsibility, who intervened in the hearing that will be extended until next Thursday. These kidnappings were part of a policy of financing the internal war in Colombia as a form of subjugation of the population, territorial and political, for the exchange of prisoners.
We, as the former Secretariat, assume responsibility for the effect of that policy. Ricardo said that they were insane attitudes that were the result of the loss of a political north, the loss of the training work that was usual in the FARC, and that we, in the position of command, are responsible for.
Brazilian authorities arrested Milton Ribeiro, the former education minister of President Jair Bolsonaro's government, for alleged corruption and influence trafficking. The Brazilian justice system ordered the arrest of Ribeiro on Wednesday for allegedly favoring evangelical pastors with public resources. In a leaked audio, Ribeiro acknowledged that the funds were transferred with the knowledge of President Jair Bolsonaro to pastors Guilmar Santos and Arilton Moura, who are also under investigation for working informally with mayors to release funds from the Ministry of Education. On Wednesday, Cuba increased generation capacity after synchronizing thermoelectric plant. The block number 1 of the Lidio Ramon Perez thermoelectric power plant in Felton, located in the eastern province of Holguin, successfully synchronized with the national electric power system. The technical director of the thermoelectric plant, Euclides Rodriguez, confirmed that the unit was already delivering 200 megawatts of power. However, he also said that adjustments to the parameters of the burners and the boiler were still being made until it gradually reached the block's maximum power of 260 megawatts. The Caribbean nation is going through a complex situation in the sector, with breakdowns in several thermoelectric plants, maintenance in others, and daily deficits in electricity generation. On Wednesday, June 22nd, a new anniversary of the Day of Latin American and Caribbean Unity is celebrated. This date pays tribute to the installation of the Amphiathonic Congress, whose objective was being to collaborate in the consolidation of the unity of the new republics. This Congress was installed in 1826 in Panama City and responded to the dreams and integrationist efforts of the liberator Simón Bolívar, with the creation of a confederation of Ibero-American peoples from Mexico to Chile and Argentina. In recent years, various organizations such as ALBA, TCP, and CELAC have strengthened their role as organizations in favor of regional unity, giving way to a consolidation of Latin American and Caribbean countries. And the U.S. economy faces an uncertain global environment, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said. In the first of 2 closely watched days of testimony to the Congress, Powell again stressed that the Federal Reserve understands the hardship caused by the rising prices and is committed to bringing down inflation, which has reached a 40-year high. The U.S. Central Bank last week announced the most aggressive interest rate increase in nearly 30 years and promised more action to come to combat the price surge, with gas and food costs soaring and millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet. But fears mount that the rapid tightening of financial conditions could go too far and tip the world's largest economy into recession. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Bulgarian coalition government collapses after a no-confidence vote in parliament. The motion had been filed by the conservative GERB party after blaming the government for what it considered a failure of its economic and financial policy, as consumer inflation soared. 123 lawmakers in the 240-seat chamber voted in favor of the motion, 2 more than needed to succeed, while 116 voted against. 1 member of the parliament missed the vote through illness. President Rumen Radev will now have 3 attempts to see if any party can form a governing majority among lawmakers. Prime Minister Kirill Petskov's party is expected to receive the first mandate from Radev to try to gather a majority, followed by GERB and then another party of Radev's choosing. Analysts said there is no guarantee that another national vote in this country of 6.5 million people, which last year went through the 3 such polls, will end its political instability. The Russian President Vladimir Putin laid flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier outside the Kremlin wall in Moscow to mark the anniversary of the day that Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. In the same context, Russia accused Germany of anti-Russian sentiment in a statement on the anniversary of the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi troops in 1941, as tensions rage over Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry also accused NATO member Germany of building up its military presence near Russia's western borders. Tensions between Moscow and Berlin have soared after Germany condemned Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, joining Western sanctions on the Kremlin and supplying weapons to Kiev. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov meets with Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi as he visits Tehran for talks on boosting trade and energy cooperation as the two countries grapple with Western economic sanctions. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said they will discuss a number of pressing international issues during this situation, and including the situation surrounding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, as well as the developments in Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, Transcaucasia, Yemen, and the Caspian Sea region. Last month, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian arrived to Moscow to discuss bilateral cooperation and Vienna talks to revive the nuclear deal with the Russian officials. The Russian Foreign Ministry said that talks to revive the JCPOA are proceeding as usual, as there are no delays in the process. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said his government will cut the value-added tax on electricity by half to shield consumers from soaring inflation fueled by the conflict in Ukraine. The announcement comes days and after Sanchez's socialists were trashed Sunday in a regional election in Andalusia, a long-time party stronghold. Sanchez told the parliament that the VAT reduction from 10 to 5% will be approved at an extraordinary cabinet meeting on Saturday. His government last year slashed the VAT rate on electricity from 21 to 10% to ease the impact of electricity price hikes on consumers. The latest tax cut will be part of a package which will be adopted on Saturday to help consumers deal with rising inflation, which hit 8.7% in May, its highest level in decades. The Prime Minister did not provide further details about the pressures and measures to be adopted. And thousands of farmers gathered with their tractors in central Netherlands to protest the government's far-reaching plans to cut nitrogen emissions. In one of their largest ever demonstrations, the farmers demanded the scrapping of recently announced plans by the Hague-based government, which could see a 30% reduction in livestock. The Netherlands, the world's second-largest agricultural exporters, is one of the top greenhouse gas emitters in Europe, especially of nitrogen, with much of blamed on cattle-produced nature and fertilizer. But farmers say they are being unfairly targeted, as opposed to big business and industry, with many vowing to resist and persist any plans to scale down or close the farms. And the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered a recorded keynote speech prior to the virtual BRIC summit hosted in Beijing. BRICS members are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, a group of emerging economies that Modi said can evolve as an engine of global growth.
Today, when the whole world is focusing on post-COVID recovery, the role of BRICS countries will continue to remain very important. This year, we are expecting 7.5% growth, which makes us the fastest growing major economy.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Malawi's President Lazarus Chakwera relieved his Vice President Saulus Chilima of all delegated powers on Tuesday after Chilima was named in a massive corruption scandal in government contracts, already implicated several senior officials. The announcement follows a new report by the Anti-Corruption Bureau, which is investigating British Malawian businessperson Suneth Sattar on suspicion of corruption, fraud and money laundering. Several ministers and former ministers have already been arrested in connection with the case. The police and the military reportedly awarded 16 contracts worth $150 million to 5 companies owned by Mr. Sattar between 2017 and 2021. In 2020, presidential candidate Saulus Chilma had teamed up with Lazarus Chakwera to win the rerun election following fraud in the first poll in 2019. And 61 years after the assassination of Congolese independence hero Patrice Lumumbas, his last remains returned to his homeland on Wednesday for an emotionally charged 9-day tour around the country and a burial ceremony. Although only a tooth remains, for his body was dissolved in acid, the tooth has been placed in a coffin. The tooth had been handed over to his relatives on Monday in Brussels, as per a court ruling of 2020, but the handover ceremony had been postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The coffin and the accompanying delegation arrived at Kinshasa, and from there they flew to the central province of Sankuru, where Lumumba, the country's first post-independence leader, was born in the village of Ouanula in 1925. Lumumba's last remains will be taken to sites relevant to Lumumba's life and be laid to rest in a mausoleum in the capital Kinshasa on June 30th, following 3 days of national mourning. With the world food crisis worsening due to the ongoing war in Ukraine, the focus is now turning to Africa for solutions. However, experts say it's still too early as the continent is not ready. A Swedish Stockholm University expert said productivity among farmers in Africa is very low since the Green Revolution that dramatically changed productivity and production, particularly in Asia and Latin America, has not really had that impact in Africa. The expert stated that climate change is also an important factor when the Horn of Africa is facing its worst drought in decades. The United Nations has warned that tens of millions of people on the continent are at the verge of starving, and many flee to Europe in search of a better life. The European Border and the Coast Guard Agency reported the arrival of some 86,000 illegal migrants from Africa between January and May this year. The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, declared the collapse of the country's economy in view of the debt owed to the several oil and gas companies. The Premier pointed out that the debt of the state-owned oil gas company Ceylon Petroleum Corporation amounts to over $700 million and that no country or organization in the world is willing to provide fuel to the country. The Premier stressed that by the end of July, an agreement could be reached with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and a financial assistance program could be agreed. In this sense, the executive indicated that Colombo concluded the first consultations with the IMF and exchanged ideas on various sectors, such as public finances, debt levels, stability of the banking sector, and the social security. And now we move on to other topics. Afghanistan's government has appealed for more international aid as the country reels from a devastating 6.1 magnitude earthquake, which killed at least 1,000 people and left international organizations scrambling to provide emergency shelter and food to remote regions. More than 3,000 houses were destroyed as a result of the earthquake, which struck near the city of Khost, around 100 miles southwest of the capital, Kabul. Rescue efforts have been hampered as communication networks were badly hit in the devastation. People have been digging through rubble with their hands in the search for survivors. A health ministry spokesperson said around 1,000 people had been rescued by Thursday morning, but reiterated pleas for international relief as the country lacks sufficient resources. Earthquakes tend to cause serious damage in Afghanistan, where dwellings are unstable or poorly built. The Chinese government announced on Wednesday that it has renewed the weather alert for the continuous storms and floods that are hitting the country. The Meteorological Center for the Asian Giant reported that rainfall records is expected for the eastern, southern, and the central regions, for which the authorities call on the people to remain alert and to take precautions. In this sense, the government activated the maximum alert for the southern territories after identifying the risk of flooding in the basin of the torrent. In this context, the central government allocated some $30 million for search and rescue operations and flood control. And TeleSUR expands its signal with new satellite parameters. Since more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are heard in other farther away nations. These parameters are in place since June 1st in Latin America and the Caribbean, both in English and in Spanish, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. This news multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. So we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.